Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. Bill Trebelov stood frozen and helpless, watching his beloved wife snuggle warmly against their next-door neighbor, Roger. Emily was smiling so radiantly that she seemed to glow from within. She was wearing a light yellow dress that left almost no room for imagination. Her slender body fit perfectly into Roger's embrace, as if they were two pieces of a puzzle. They were laughing, surrounded by friends and neighbors with familiar but strangely indistinguishable faces. Roger whispered something in Emily's ear, and it made her giggle like a little girl. She playfully slapped him on the shoulder and then stood on tiptoe to kiss him. Bill opened his mouth to scream but couldn't utter a word. He was struggling to breathe. It seemed to him that he was underwater. He began to panic and felt his chest tighten and his pulse quicken. Roger looked him straight in the eye and acknowledged his presence with a malicious smile. He winked and kissed Emily again, right there in front of all their friends and neighbors. This time when he kissed her, his tongue grotesquely protruded from his mouth, and his hands boldly explored her body. He lifted the hem of Emily's dress, exposing her bare buttocks to the warm summer air. She responded with playful cooing and returned his kiss with gratuitous lust. Roger broke off their kiss and looked back at Bill. This time his smile turned to laughter. He pointed a finger at Bill, and all heads turned to follow his direction. The surrounding audience burst into raucous laughter. Some laughed so hard that they spilled their drinks. Even Emily couldn't hide her laughter behind an elegant pen. Bill followed the crowd's gaze and lowered his head. He was naked, completely naked. He woke up with wild eyes and gasping for air. He turned to the table next to the bed, and at that very moment the alarm clock rang. He turned it off and turned to the other side of the bed. As he had every morning for the past 3 years, he was exhausted and had not slept well. At first, Emily thought it was just the flu. She started vomiting and couldn't swallow any food or liquid. Then constipation began, and this led to bloating and unbearable abdominal pain. When Bill found her curled up in a fetal position on the floor of their bathroom one evening, that's when he finally insisted that she go to the emergency room and ask someone to examine her. When the doctors ordered an ultrasound, the first thought that came to Bill's mind was that she was pregnant. "I don't want another child," he thought. "We finally kicked the other two out of the house. I'm too old to start all over again." In the years to come, he would spend countless lonely nights reflecting on the selfishness of this thought and berating himself for having it in his head. "There's no reason to panic," the doctor assured them, but his expression said otherwise. The doctor described a suspicious area on Emily's ovaries and explained that laparoscopy would be required to get a better look at this area. Although his stomach was clenched with worry, Bill maintained a calm demeanor and insisted that there was no reason to worry. "We'll get through this," he assured her, gently stroking her arm as she waited to be taken away for the procedure. "Whatever happens to us, we will deal with it. Do you remember when Janie got sick? We thought we were going to lose her forever. But this did not happen. We've been through this together. Do you remember when we first got married? Did we live in this shitty little apartment in this rundown neighborhood?" Emily smiled bravely at him. "We didn't have a penny, and then I made it even worse by getting pregnant." "Yes, well, I suppose I had something to do with it too," he replied with a smile. "And you were worried that we wouldn't have enough money to raise a child. But I told you that everything would be fine. I told you that I go to classes in the evenings, and I will earn enough money so that you don't have to work, and you can stay at home and raise our child. Eventually, I would have earned enough money so that we could move to a nicer place. And we did it," she said, squeezing his hand and looking at him with sparkling eyes. "You've worked so hard and provided for our family so well. I couldn't have dreamed of a better husband and father for our children. Well, don't talk like it's over. We still have a lot to do. I'm afraid, Bill. I'm scared too, Em, but we'll get through this, I promise." While Emily was lying in the recovery room after the procedure, her doctor entered the waiting room with the same serious expression that Bill had seen before. A tumor was found, the doctor explained, and a sample was taken. The results would be known soon, and there was still hope that it was benign. However, given her symptoms, the doctor added bluntly, "you should prepare for the worst." Bill wandered down the corridor. The floor barely felt under his feet, and the walls became hazy and colorless. Emotions overwhelmed him so suddenly that he was not ready for this. He quickly turned into the nearest toilet, entered the stall farthest from the entrance, locked the door, and collapsed on the floor. He was taught to believe that real men don't cry. But for the first time in his adult life, he cried like a child. Ovarian cancer, the fourth stage. It seemed an impossible diagnosis, a cruel joke. Just a few days before she was admitted to the hospital, Emily was as happy and healthy as ever. How could the disease develop in such a short period of time? Bill refused to accept this diagnosis. He told his wife that they would seek a second opinion. If this opinion was the same, then they would be looking for a third and a fourth. No matter how many doctors it takes, they will find someone who has the courage to make a more optimistic diagnosis. "Bill, I love you," Emily said, smiling. "But darling, you need to face the truth. It's happening, and there's nothing you or I can do to stop it." "Bullshit," he said. He could feel the anger bubbling to the surface. "Honey, I'm so sorry that I'm putting you through this." He looked at her in amazement. She was experiencing this unfathomable moment now, peering into the dark depths of her own death, and her main concern was him. Over the next few months, he would continue to marvel at the strength and character of this woman. Together, they decided that she would undergo chemotherapy to prolong her life as much as possible. Bill was never a good helper and tried to avoid being around sick people whenever possible. However, having no other choice, he quickly learned and became a first-class nurse. He helped her get into and out of bed, took her to the bathroom, and cleaned up the vomit from the bucket she kept by the bed. Towards the end, he learned how to clean her drain tube and change the IVs. The end came sooner than he expected. One evening, they were watching TV. Emily was lying on her makeshift hospital bed, which Bill had installed in the living room at her request. Suddenly, he felt that something had changed. He looked at her, and she seemed more calm and peaceful than usual. Hesitantly, he walked over to her bed and took her hand in his, trying not to squeeze too hard. She didn't move a muscle. Fighting back the tears that welled up in his eyes, he put a couple of fingers to the main artery in her neck. There was no pulse. The months passed in a gloomy fog. At first, friends and relatives often visited him, but over time these visits became less and less frequent. His children lived out of state, but they often called to find out how he was. Bill was busy around the house, doing things he neglected while he took care of Emily. He found that while his mind was busy, he could not think about her. It's not that he doesn't want to think about her, but he's found that when he does, it puts him out of action for hours. Over time, he learned to control it a little better and focus on the pleasant memories rather than the horror of her last dying weeks. During the day, it was easy to keep his mind occupied with work or various projects around the house. He was alone with his thoughts at night. Most nights, he just cried himself to sleep. It got to the point where he was afraid to go to bed and found that he was going to bed later and later and sleeping less and less. It was during one of those sleepless nights, when he lay in bed with his eyes wide open, staring at the black ceiling above his head, that his life, or at least the perception of his life, changed forever. He was thinking about the email that Emily had written to him a few years ago. It was sweet and romantic, and it filled his heart with overwhelming joy when he read it. He understood better how much he meant to his wife and how much she loved him with all her heart. He would give anything to read those words again, he thought. After getting rid of the charade of trying to fall asleep, he got out of bed and went to his office to turn on his laptop. He scrolled down to the bottom of his inbox and confirmed his fears that he had deleted all his old emails. He slammed his fist on the table and sighed. Then a thought occurred to him, and he switched to Emily's email. She didn't keep her email account in order very carefully, and at times it drove him crazy because she often deleted emails that he thought she should have saved. But she didn't know enough about computers to know that her deleted emails weren't actually deleted until she emptied them from the trash. Of course, when he scrolled through the deleted folder in her account, he found messages a few years before. He remembered that the email she had sent him had been written about 5 years ago, and he had looked through the messages from that year, one by one. He paused when he found a message from their next-door neighbor, Roger. It was titled, "About Last Night," and dated July 5th. He seemed to recall attending an Independence Day barbecue in the neighborhood that year. In fact, it was the last year that he and Emily went to this annual event. With a curious expression on his face, Bill clicked on the email and it opened. "Hi, Emily. I just want to say that I really enjoyed last night. I've wanted to do this for years. It's a pity that we were interrupted. If you ever want to finish what we started, you know where I live. Roger. P.S. Don't worry about the fillet. I've talked to him and he's not going to tell anyone." "What the fuck?" Bill muttered to himself. What did Roger mean by that? What did he enjoy doing? What had he wanted to do for years? What did he mean by finish what they started? And what did Phil have to do with it? Bill had never considered the remote possibility that Emily had ever cheated on him during any point in their 25 years together. She was as devoted as any of their acquaintances and friends. Of course, they went through some difficult periods like any married couple, but their relationship was rock solid. On the other hand, he remembered that Emily had been drinking heavily that evening. She didn't usually get drunk, but on that particular evening, one of the neighbors brought homemade wine, which Emily thought was fine, and she overdid it a little. When she suggested they make other plans for Independence Day in the following years, he suggested that she was embarrassed because she was so drunk in front of the neighbors. But maybe there was another reason. He quickly searched for a response to this email or any other emails from Roger, but found nothing. He closed the mail client, and the desktop wallpaper showed the smiling face of his beautiful wife on her 30th birthday. He stared at the photo from a new perspective. Was it possible that she wasn't the loving and faithful wife he thought she was? That night, a recurring nightmare began. The next morning, Bill was standing at the window of his house, sipping coffee. He looked across the street at the house where Roger and Chelsea lived with their 2 children. Their house was the largest in the area, and the lawn in front of it was immaculately maintained. The black Lexus, sparkling clean as always, was parked in the driveway. Bill had never liked Roger from the very first day he moved to the area. Roger was a trial lawyer in Philadelphia, and apparently very successful. He was the kind of guy who pretended to be humble, but at the same time took every opportunity to let you know that he was better than you in every way. He was more handsome, fitter, made more money, had a better vacation, owned a nicer house and a nicer car, and married a prettier woman. His wife Chelsea was a typical trophy wife. She was a few years younger, with long blonde hair and an artificial tan. Almost everyone in the neighborhood suspected that Roger was constantly cheating on her, but she was too stupid to figure it out. Their children were terribly spoiled, and they were given everything they ever wanted. The plan was to sip coffee and wait for Roger to leave the house. Bill would show him the email and, if his suspicions were correct, knock out some of the asshole's pearly white teeth. However, when he took a sip of coffee, the holes in this plan became obvious. Roger's food simply didn't any wrongdoing. The email was vague enough to be interpreted in any number of ways, and he was experienced enough with words to turn it any way he wanted, even if he confessed and Bill knocked him out. Roger would sue him in the blink of an eye, and that jerk would own his house. Bill finished the rest of his coffee just as Roger came out of his front door dressed in an expensive suit. He swaggered over to his Lexus, got behind the wheel, and backed out of the driveway. Bill watched the car speed down the road and noticed Phil's other neighbor, who was standing in his yard watering plants. This is an opportunity, Bill muttered to himself. Adrenaline surged through his veins as he walked briskly towards Phil's house. Phil turned around just as Bill reached his driveway, smiled and waved. However, his smile disappeared when he noticed Bill's expression. Is everything all right, Bill? Phil asked. No, not really, Bill replied. I have a question for you. All right, Phil said hesitantly, asking, why didn't you tell me that Roger was using my wife? All the blood drained from Phil's face, and his jaw dropped. He took a step back and almost tripped over the hedge. What? Oh, lamb, Bill. I didn't want to cause any problems, that's all. When did you find out about this? Just now, Bill said. Oh, shit, Phil said, lowering his head. I'm sorry, Bill. Why don't you tell me what happened? Bill asked. The rage inside him made his muscles tremble. Look, Bill, it's been a long time. And Emily, she's gone now. There is no need to dig up. Bill took a step toward Phil, his eyes pierced through them, and he stared fiercely into his face, clenching his fist. Tell me what happened right now. Okay, Phil said, raising his hands defensively, but I really think you were making a mistake digging this up. Bill stood still and waited patiently, while Phil took a deep breath and fidgeted nervously. He looked like he was about to throw up. It was at a 4th of July party a few years ago, he began. Do you remember that it was in that house on the other side of the block? Well, I didn't want to walk all that way, so I went there. Later that night, I went out to get something from my car, and that's when I saw some movement in Roger's car. What did you see, Phil? I wasn't sure at first, but as I got closer, I also heard some noise. I looked out the back window, and that's when I saw them. Emily, what were they doing, Phil? Bill asked. The veins on his forehead were bulging, and his eyes were burning. Come on, man. You know what they were doing. I'm not going to spell it out. I need to hear the words, Phil. They were making love, Phil said too loudly. He quickly looked around and then spoke more quietly. She was kind of lying in the backseat, and he was on top. Bill's hands involuntarily clenched into fists again, and he felt an irresistible urge to hit the nearest object. Phil must have read his mind. Hey, dude, you asked for it, he said, still holding up his hands. I didn't want to tell you. Yeah, you're a real friend, Bill spat out. You've been hiding this from me for 5 years. Didn't think it would benefit anyone. It's not my place to interfere. I know Raider had a little chat with you after that. Let me guess. Did he offer you the free service at his law firm in exchange for your silence? Jesus, Bill, who do you take me for? You know what, Phil, Bill said, stepping back. I don't know what kind of person you are anymore. Emily knelt down and ran her hands over the front of Roger's khaki shorts. She purred. Is this all for me? While Emily continued to shake her head along his hard and massive pole, Roger held up the imported beer in Bill's direction and nodded. The other neighbors turned to face him, all with the same sly grins. The nightmares always ended the same way. All the neighbors laughed and pointed at Bill when he stood frozen in place. How many neighbors were privy to this secret? How many of them laughed at him behind his back just like they did in their dreams? Everything he thought he knew about his wife and his marriage was a lie. She was just a dirty, cheating fool, and their marriage was a complete sham. That juicy letter she wrote to him, which he had cherished all these years, was just an admission of guilt. How could she love him so much and appreciate their marriage so much if she could spread her legs for a fucking asshole like Roger? How many others did she spread her legs for? Bill stared at the house across the street with its perfect lawn. Of course, Roger had nothing to do with the condition of this lawn. He hired someone to trim it and fertilize it. This man has never done a single hard job in his entire life. How righteous would it be to go there right now and pour a pile of rock salt on this lawn? Maybe write the word scammer in huge letters so that everyone in the neighborhood knows who this bag of shit really is. White-hot rage flared up in him. He grabbed the nearest object symbolically, a frame with a photo of Emily, and threw it into the wall, smashing it into pieces. He looked around the room for something else to throw, and was disgusted to see pictures and reminders of Emily everywhere. He went down to the basement and appeared with a large container, which he filled with all the objects he found that reminded him of her. He shoved the container into the closet and slammed the door. Breathing heavily, he sank into his favorite recliner and opened a bottle of beer. The thirst for revenge replaced grief as his new, all-consuming obsession. Roger simply couldn't be allowed to get away with what he had done. He deserved to be punished, and Bill will be the one to impose it. Roger needed to know what it was like to be humiliated. He needs to get over the loss, like Bill did. He deserved to lose his wife, his house, his children, and his beloved car. Everything that mattered to him had to be snatched away from him. It took Bill several days to come up with a plan. It took a few more to find the right woman to carry out this plan. As soon as he found her, he met with her in a cafe to make sure that she fit the parameters and that she was ready and able to follow orders. The money didn't matter, and he paid her handsomely. After several days of planning, the day of reckoning has finally arrived. With his heart pounding, Bill knocked on the door of the house across the street. Chelsea replied, looking puzzled. "What's wrong, Bill?" "What is it?" she asked sweetly. "It's okay," Bill said, "but I need you to come with me. I need to show you something." "What's the matter?" she asked, looking worried. "It's something very important to you," he explained. "That's all I can say right now. Just come with me. You are welcome." She continued to question him as they drove the short distance to the country club, but Bill was adamant in his refusal to answer her questions. He almost felt sorry for her. However, she deserved to know the truth as much as he did. He pulled into the parking lot of the country club, and Chelsea suddenly panicked. "Why are we here?" she asked. "Is there something wrong with Roger? Did you know he's playing golf here today?" "Yes, I know," Bill replied calmly. He looked at the time on the dashboard. "Follow me," he said, getting out of the car. He took her on foot around the country club and along a short path through a wooded area to a nearby property. It was empty except for one lone car parked at the far end. "It looks like our Lexus," Chelsea said. "Why is it parked over there?" "Let's see," Bill said, trying his best to suppress a smile. When they reached the car, Bill slowed down, allowing Chelsea to walk ahead of him. He reached into his pocket and took out his cell phone, clicked on it to switch to the camera, and then clicked again to switch to video mode. What was about to happen would be so wonderful that he knew he would want to relive this moment over and over again. Chelsea cautiously approached the car. When she got close enough to see what was going on in the back seat, she gasped loudly and covered her mouth with her hands. She froze in place for a moment. Then she rushed to the handle of the back door and flung it open with force. "You're an asshole. Stop it," she screamed. She leaned into the back seat and punched Roger in the torso as he raised his arms in defense. She continued to scream and punch, and then grabbed an armful of clothes from the back seat. She kicked the door shut. Her face was smeared with leaking makeup, and her usually perfect hair was in a mess. Roger appeared on the other side of the car and stole a glance around before ducking behind the back of the car. "Give me my clothes," he shouted to his wife. He was completely naked, and his hands covered his private parts. "Fuck you!" Chelsea shouted and ran to the front of the car, still holding her clothes in her hands. "I'm not kidding, Chelsea. Stop it," he shouted. "Give me my fucking clothes." "Fuck you," she shouted again. He chased her around the car for 2 laps while the half-dressed woman in the back seat quietly slipped out and ran up to Bill. Roger stopped on the passenger side of the car, and Chelsea looked at him over the roof. "Chelsea, please give me my clothes," Roger said in a calm voice, "and we can talk about this." In one swift movement, she opened the door, threw her clothes inside, and slid behind the wheel. She locked the doors before Roger could grab the handle. She looked at her husband with mascara smeared on his cheeks, raised her middle finger in the air, and drove off, screeching tires on the road. Roger stood in the middle of the parking lot with a dumbfounded expression on his face. "Chelsea, you're a fucking fool! Come back here!" He screamed in a shrill voice and jumped up and down, still covering his genitals with one hand. For the first time, Roger seemed to notice Bill. It took him a moment to figure out who it was, and another moment to realize that he was being recorded. "Bill, what the fuck are you doing here?" he shouted. "Turn off the fucking camera. Actually, just give me the phone." He held out his hand as if he were a school teacher demanding that her students spit out the gum. "You're fucking crazy if you think I'm going to give you my phone?" Bill laughed. "Give me the fucking phone," Roger screamed in the same shrill tone. He took a few steps towards Bill. "I'm telling you right now," Bill said, pressing a button on his phone and putting it in his pocket. "If you take one more step towards me, I'll knock you the fuck out." Roger stopped dead in his tracks. He looked past Bill to the woman hiding behind him. He seemed to be overcome by panic and confusion, and his eyes filled with tears. "Why?" Roger asked. "You know damn well why," Bill replied. "Come on, honey." He took the woman by the hand and led her back to the main parking lot. Roger froze in place and stared into the distance. "Here's the other half," Bill said, handing the woman a thick envelope as soon as they reached his car. "As agreed." "Thank you," she said. "I have to say that it was a lot easier than I thought." "You mean seduce him?" "Yes," she said, adjusting her top. "Don't get me wrong. I've never had any problems finding men." "Well, you're his type," Bill said matter-of-factly. "And how do you know that?" "What is it?" she asked playfully. Bill turned to her. "You look a lot like my wife." "Oh," she replied softly. "I suppose you also knew that he wouldn't hesitate to make love in his car, right?" "He's a predictable guy," Bill said with a chuckle. "He seems to have an unhealthy fetish for this car." "So I think everything went as you expected." "Better. Much better than I could ever have expected. Thank you." They rode in silence for a while. She smiled. "Okay, but how did you know that he would cheat on his wife?" "One more easy question," he replied. "Once a cheater, always a cheater." When Bill got home, he opened a beer and watched the video on his phone over and over again, laughing until his stomach hurt. A fluffy red cat purred at his feet. "Felix," he said, scratching the cat behind the ears. "I haven't laughed so hard in ages." If only he could share this video with the whole world, he thought. He took another sip of beer and almost choked on it from the realization. "Felix," he said with a big smile. "We're not done making that asshole pay for what he did." He ran up the stairs and went straight to his office. He turned on his laptop and plugged in his phone. He created a YouTube account, and a few minutes later, his video was uploaded for everyone to see. He laughed uncontrollably, signing it with the headline, "Wife catches husband cheating, fun is guaranteed." Incredibly, within a week, the video went viral, gaining over 400,000 views. A week later, the views exceeded more than 2 million. Bill's Facebook friends shared this video, unaware that Bill had uploaded it. When a popular television show showed it, the video went mega viral, surpassing over 100 million views. News vans began to appear across the street from Bill's house. Reporters appeared at Bill's door, asking about the whereabouts of his neighbors. People started making parody videos, making fun of Roger's high-pitched voice and putting it to music. One of these videos also went viral, which further increased the views. Roger was forced to resign from his law firm. He became too notorious and recognizable for the jury to take him seriously. Soon after, Chelsea filed for divorce. She ended up with a house, children, and in a delightfully righteous twist a car. There were rumors around that she smashed the car with a sledgehammer and then sold it for scrap. Bill watched the whole thing with stunned detachment. Justice had been served, and he had no regrets about what he had done. In his opinion, he and Roger were even now. And yet he felt a cold and bitter emptiness inside himself. He wasn't sure why he was still feeling this way until he heard a knock on the door. It was a cold winter day, and he had just thrown a log on the fire when he heard an unexpected visitor at his door. When he opened the door, he was shocked to see Marilyn standing there. She was Emily's best friend. They had been friends since elementary school. He hadn't seen her since the funeral. "Marilyn," he said, standing in the doorway looking confused. "What are you doing here?" "Hi, Bill," she said with an awkward smile. "May I come in?" "Of course," he said. They shared an awkward moment of hesitation and then hugged each other. He led her to the chairs in front of the fireplace. "Can I get you something to drink?" "No thanks," she said. "I won't be long." He stared into her eyes, puzzled. "What can I do for you?" "Well," she said, "I saw the video on the internet." She pointed in the direction of Roger's old house across the street. "I'm pretty sure the whole world has seen this video." Bill laughed. "I have a feeling that you posted it," she said. "Really? What is it?" he asked. "I just have a hunch, that's all," she interrupted. "I talked to Phil." She let the words sink in and looked at him pointedly. Bill shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Well, and what?" he asked. His expression was stone cold. "He told me you knew," she continued, "and I'm here because I made a promise to Emily. I made that promise just before she died. She told me that if you ever find out what happened, give it to you." Bill watched intently as Marilyn reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. On it, in Emily's handwriting, was written one word: Bill. Marilyn handed it to him and he stared at it dispassionately. A few moments passed and neither of them moved a single muscle. The only sounds were the crackling of the fireplace and the ticking of the clock. Without warning, Bill snatched the envelope from Marilyn's hands and threw it into the fire. Marilyn rushed to the fireplace and tried to pull it out, but Bill grabbed her arm. "What did you do?" she screamed, her eyes wide and her mouth agape. "Now we're even," he said calmly. "Your dying wife wrote you this letter," she said. "How could you just throw it away like that? What do you mean you're even?" "I never had a chance to confront her," he said in the same calm tone. "And now she'll never have a chance to explain. But you have to hear her side of the story." "To hell with her version of the story," he shouted, causing Marilyn to recoil. What could she say to explain herself? "I'm really sorry. Isn't that what you think? Didn't it mean anything to me? Was it just a mistake?" Marilyn sat in silence for a moment, stunned. She stared at him intently as he paced the room. "She never meant to hurt you," she said softly. "You were the love of her life, you know that." "I don't know anything else," he shouted. "It was all a lie. Our whole marriage was a lie." "No, it wasn't like that," Marilyn screamed, jumping to her feet. "She loved you, damn it. And yes, it was a mistake. People make mistakes, Bill. She had drunk too much, wasn't thinking straight, and made a mistake. This one mistake doesn't mean that your whole marriage was a sham, and it doesn't mean that she never loved you." "Yes, well, for me it is." Marilyn stared at him, but he refused to look at her. She looked around the room and saw empty shelves and tables where family photos had once stood. She shook her head and sighed. "Bill, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen." Finally, he looked at her. His eyes filled with tears and he swallowed hard. "Forgiveness is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength. It's not about the person who hurt you. It's about you. It's not about letting someone off the hook. It's about allowing yourself the freedom to put your past aside and move on with your life." He stood silent and motionless. She quietly went up to him and hugged him tightly. Then she went to the door and left. It was spring when Bill heard the knock on his door again. Marilyn was standing on the porch, smiling curiously. "Are you going somewhere?" she asked, pointing to a truck loaded with stuff in the driveway. A sign on the front lawn said the house was sold. "Just packing up the last of my things," Bill said with a smile. "Come in." "Looks like I caught you just in time," she remarked, pointing at the almost empty house. "I just happened to be in the neighborhood, saw a sign and a loaded truck, and put two and two together." "You should have been a detective," he teased. She replied with a smile. "I'm uploading stuff, and these are the last ones." "Do you need any help?" she suggested. "No, but thanks, I think I can handle it." "So, where are you going?" "Florida," he said. "It's time to get away from the cold. There is a retirement community there where the ratio of women to men is almost 2-to-1. I like these chances." He gave her a devilish grin. She looked around the room and stopped when she noticed a photograph on the end table. It showed Bill and Emily smiling happily and looking healthy and young. "Well, I'm glad to see you moving on," she said with a smile. "I'm happy for you." "Thank you, Marilyn. I decided to follow the advice of my good old friend.